In 1880, a Colt revolver cost just $12. An hour with the most expensive woman in a Dodge City brothel? $5. But a simple cup of coffee went for $0.24, about $8 in today's money. It may sound crazy, but the way prices worked in the Old West was completely different from what you'd expect. Get ready. What you're about to find out will change everything you thought about that era. Fact 1. Ice, the most valuable product in the Old West. That's right. Before refrigerators came along, ice was a luxury item in the Old West. Just imagine it. Men cut blocks from frozen lakes up in Massachusetts, packed them in sawdust, and shipped them by train and boat to hot towns like Tombstone, Arizona. In the summer of 1881, a 25-kilo block cost between 50 cents and $1. Sounds cheap? Think again. That was more than a cowboy made in a full day of riding under the blazing sun. Saloons paid $5 to $10 a week just to serve cold beer to their customers. In today's money, that dollar would be worth about 30. The man who started it all was Frederick Tudor, Boston's Ice King, who by the 1830s was already exporting ice all the way to India. The industry was bringing in more than $4 million a year by the 1870s. Fact 2. The Colt single-action Army revolver, a working tool. Here's something that might surprise you. The legendary Colt 45, the same one you've seen in so many westerns, sold straight from the factory in 1873 for just $12 to $17. Adjusted for inflation, that comes out to about $400 in today's prices. Yep, almost the same as a basic Smith & Wesson costs in an American gun store. Colt did that on purpose. They wanted to put the gun in the hands of the average working man, the rancher, the settler, carving out the West. And it worked. The United States Army alone bought 37,000 Livery 3 units between 1873 and 1891. The funny thing is, that cheap working tool turned into a collectible treasure. Today, an original example in good condition can sell for anywhere from $1,000 to $15,000 on the collector's market. Fact 3. Coffee, more expensive than anything else on the menu. Have you ever stopped to think that back in 8 Baht, a cowboy paid the same price for a cup of coffee as for a shot of whiskey? That's right. In a saloon in Dodge City, Kansas, both cost 25 cents, which would be around $7 or $8 today. More expensive than your Starbucks breakfast coffee. And there's a reason for that. The beans came from far away, crossed oceans, traveled by train and wagon, and only then made it to the frontier. It was a luxury item in the middle of nowhere. And here's the craziest part. Coffee is still the second most traded commodity on the planet, second only to oil. And the price you pay at the bakery today is set in the same place where Old West traders used to make their deals, the Chicago Board of Trade. Nearly 150 years later, the game is still being played at the same table. Fact 4. Salt, a matter of life and death. Think about it. Before refrigerators existed, how did a rancher out in the middle of nowhere keep meat from going bad for months? The answer fit in a little white bag: salt. And that simple stuff was worth its weight in gold. Around 1870, in isolated towns across the American West, a kilo of salt cost about 10 to 25 cents, which would be around $3 to $7 today. It may not sound like much, but cattle ranchers needed sack after sack of it, and often ended up paying a lot more depending on the region. No wonder entire empires fought over it for centuries. During the Civil War itself, both sides fought battles just to seize the enemy's salt works. The Battle of Saltville in Virginia in 1864 was one of the bloodiest. Whoever controlled the salt controlled the Army's stomach, and without food on the table, no army moves forward. Fact 5. Land, Not as cheap as you think. You've probably heard that the government gave away free land in the Old West, right? Well, the real story is a little different. The Homestead Act of 1862 offered 160 acres to anyone who worked the land for 5 straight years. Sounds like a pretty sweet deal, but the best plots, the ones near rivers and railroads, were already taken. Speculators bought them up early and resold them for $5 to $50 an acre. Do the math, and a decent piece of land could cost anywhere from $800 to $8,000 back then. Adjusted for inflation, $5 in 1870 would be about $150 today. Compare that to farmland in Texas today, which goes for $2,000 to $5,000 per acre. And here's the part hardly anyone mentions. Less than 20% of settlers managed to stay the full 5 years needed to secure the deed. Most of them lost everything before that. Fact 6. A bath. An unaffordable luxury. After weeks out on the trail eating dust and sleeping on the ground, a cowboy would roll into town smelling like horse and sweat. Taking a bath wasn't just about hygiene, it was almost a ceremony. In places like Dodge City, a hot bath cost anywhere from 25 to 75 cents. Sounds like nothing, right? But think of it this way. The guy made about $1 a day. So one simple bath could eat up as much as 3/4 of his daily pay. And soap wasn't even included. That was charged separately. Adjusted for today, those 50 cents in 8 would be about $15. Now compare that to today. A barbershop might charge $25 to $50 for the full service. But compared to the average paycheck now, it hits the wallet a lot less than it did for a cowboy. A bath really was a luxury item. Fact 7. A cheap pistol, the working man's gun. Did you know most cowboys never had enough money to buy a Colt? The reality is that brands like Hopkins and Allen and Forehand and Wadsworth dominated the West. They cost between $3 and $6, a full week's wages, for hard manual labor. Adjusted for inflation, that would be about $120 today. They were simple guns, with no fancy finish, but they got the job done. And here's the detail most people never connect. Those cheap pistols only existed because factories in the American Northeast developed mass production techniques with interchangeable parts. The same system Samuel Colt helped create ended up being used by competitors to sell guns that any working man could afford. And those same assembly line techniques would later be copied by Henry Ford decades later to build automobiles. The Old West was, in practice, a testing ground for American industrialization. Fact 8. Ammo in the Old West was not something people wasted for no reason. A box of 50-45 caliber cartridges cost between 75 cents and $1.25 in the 1880s. It may not sound like much, but the average cowboy made about $30 a month. So spending $1 on bullets meant giving up nearly 4% of his entire paycheck. It was like taking a pretty big chunk out of your pay today just to keep your revolver loaded. That's why most men in the West avoided shooting unless they had to. Now think about this. The gunfight at the OK Corral in Tombstone lasted about 30 seconds. Around 30 shots were fired between both sides. The total cost of that ammo? Less than $1 in 1881 money. In today's dollars, that would be about 30. 30 seconds of chaos that went down in American history cost about as much as dinner at an average restaurant. Fact 9. Barbed wire, the invention that killed the cowboy. Before 84, there was nothing to stop cattle from going wherever they wanted. The cowboy existed because of that. Someone had to drive and watch the herds out on the open range. Then Joseph Glidden patented barbed wire and changed everything. In 1875, 100 pounds cost $20. something like $600 today. But in just 5 years, the price dropped 91%, falling to less than $2. Suddenly, any rancher could fence off thousands of acres. The open range started disappearing, and with it, the need for cowboys. Many of them were out of work almost overnight. Glidden understood how big this invention really was. He sold half the patent, then bought it back and resold the whole thing to the American Steel and Wire Company. He became a millionaire. By the 1880s, production had already passed 600 million pounds a year. One simple piece of wire brought an entire era to an end. Fact 10. A decent bottle of whiskey. In Old West saloons, the whiskey most cowboys drank was not exactly something you'd choose to drink. They called it rot gut for a good reason. That stuff tore up your stomach. A lot of saloon owners mixed cheap alcohol with tobacco, pepper, and even turpentine to give it color and a burn. A bottle like that sold for less than $1. Now, if you wanted something decent, a real aged bourbon, you'd pay between $1 and $2, the equivalent of about $45 today. It wasn't outrageous, but in a time when a cowboy made $1 a day, that meant a whole day's pay for one bottle. The craziest part is that rot gut killed more people than a lot of shootouts did. Poisoning from adulterated alcohol was so common that doctors at the time were already treating it like an epidemic. Today, a bottle of 23-year-old Pappy Van Winkle can cost $4,000 on the secondary market. But at least nobody's putting turpentine in it. Fact 11. Today, you open your closet and have more clothes than you know what to do with. In the Old West, the average working person had 2, maybe 3 changes of clothes at most. That was it. A custom-made suit from a town tailor cost between $15 and $25 around 1880. It may not sound like much, but that was half a month's pay for most people. It would be like someone today spending $600 on a single outfit and needing to wear it for years. People patched clothes, sewed them back up, and handed them down from father to son. Throwing clothes away was unthinkable. The idea of buying cheap clothes and tossing them out a few weeks later simply did not exist. For 80% of the population, every piece of clothing was a serious investment. One single suit could stay with a man from his wedding to his funeral. When you think about it, it really shows how much our relationship with something as basic as getting dressed has changed. Fact 12. A racehorse, the Ferrari of the Old West. You think spending a fortune on a sports car is a modern thing? Back in the late 1800s, the same kind of madness already existed, except the engine had 4 legs. At the tracks in Lexington, Kentucky, and Saratoga, New York, elite racehorses sold for anywhere from $500 to $5,000. To give you an idea, a cowboy made about $30 to $40 a month. That means one of those horses could cost as much as 10 years of work for a ranch hand. Adjusted for inflation, a $2,000 horse back then would be worth around $60,000 today. And that obsession never went away. In 2000, the horse Fuzaichi Pegasus was sold for $70 million. The Kentucky Derby, which millions watch every year, came straight out of that 19th century craze. The passion for racehorses hasn't changed. It just got more expensive. Fact 13. The price of a stagecoach per mile. Before airplanes or paved roads existed, crossing the American West was expensive. Wells Fargo, which dominated passenger transportation, charged between 10 and 15 cents a mile. Sounds cheap, right? But do the math. The route from San Francisco to Salt Lake City covered about 2,100 miles. A ticket cost between $110 and $165. In 1870, a cowboy made somewhere around $30 to $40 a month. So that trip ate up 3 full months of work. Adjusted for inflation, we're talking about roughly $4,500 today. And what did you get for that price? 3 to 4 weeks getting thrown around inside a wooden box, eating dust, and praying you didn't run into bandits. Today, that same trip by plane costs between $150 and $300 and takes 2 hours. Wells Fargo charged 6 times more per mile than a modern airline. Fact 14. In 8-time a 50-pound sack of flour cost between $1.50 and $3, depending on where you lived. If you were in the East, near the big cities, you paid the lower price. But if you were out on the frontier, trying to build a life on land the government had given away under the Homestead Act, you paid up to 3 times more for the exact same product. Bread was the foundation of just about every American family's diet back then. So that price difference was not a small detail. It meant between 5% and 10% of an entire family's monthly income. Those $2.50 and $8.05 would be about $75 today. But now, that same sack of flour costs between $15 and $20. That's how the system worked. The government gave away the land for free, but the merchants and transport companies charged a fortune for the basics. The settler arrived free and was soon trapped by prices. Fact 15. The price of staying alive in the Old West. Back in the 1880s, calling a doctor in a small frontier town cost between $2 and $5. Doesn't sound like much, right? But hold on. If the person needed surgery, the bill jumped to $20, even $100. Now picture a cowboy making $30 a month. An appendectomy could eat up 3 full months of pay. And that's only if the doctor was willing to let him pay later. In today's money, those $50 would be about $1,500. But that same surgery, without health insurance, costs $20,000 to $35,000 in the United States today. And here's the part that stings. Americans spend more on health care than any other wealthy nation on the planet and still live shorter, sicker lives. This system of charging for every single procedure did not come out of nowhere. It was born right there in the dusty tents of the Old West. Fact 16. Gold, the price that changed America. Back in 1849, when the famous California gold rush began, an ounce of gold was worth exactly $20.67. The price was fixed by the government. But here's the detail few people talk about. In the mining camps, everything cost a fortune. A simple shovel that sold for 75 cents in New York was going for $50 in San Francisco. That's inflation of more than 1,000%. And here's what nobody told you. The guy who really got rich was not the one digging in the dirt. It was a German immigrant named Levi Strauss who sold durable pants to the miners. While thousands went broke chasing gold, he was selling the tools. That lesson is still taught today at the country's top business schools. In a gold rush, sell the shovels. Fact 17. The town lot in Tombstone, the original speculation boom. Here's a story every investor needs to know. In 1879, before silver turned Tombstone, Arizona, into a boom town, you could buy a 50 by 100 foot lot for as little as $5 to $25. 2 years later, in 1881, that same piece of land was selling for anywhere from $500 to $5,000. Anyone who got in early and sold at the peak multiplied their money by 100. Adjusted for today, $5,000 back then would be worth around $150,000. The funny thing is, that land now, just rural Arizona, is only worth about $20,000 to $40,000 today. Sound familiar? It's the same script we saw play out in Austin, Boise, and Phoenix between 2020 and 2022. The only difference is that our grandparents did all of it without Zillow, without the internet, just by word of mouth and a feel for business. Fact 18. Meat. The product that was worth more dead than alive. In the 870s, a rancher in Texas raised cattle for months, paying for pasture, water, and hard labor. In the end, he got between $5 and $10 per head. That same steer, after traveling by rail to Chicago and going through the slaughterhouses, was sold as beef for $50 to $80. Who got the difference? It wasn't the rancher. It was the railroads and the meatpacking companies. The rancher did the hard work and got the smallest cut. In 1878, Gustavus Swift changed everything by creating the refrigerated rail car. Now, fresh meat could be shipped across the country without spoiling. Swift and Company became a powerhouse. But here's the detail most people don't know. In 2007, JBS, a Brazilian company, bought Swift for $1.5 billion. The legacy of one of the biggest names in American industry now belongs to foreign owners. Fact 19. Opium, the product nobody kept track of. Did you know that in the Old West, anyone could walk into a pharmacy and buy opium without a prescription? It was sold as laudanum, a mixture of opium dissolved in alcohol, and it cost less than $1 a bottle. Doctors prescribed it for everything: toothaches, insomnia, coughs, sadness. There were no federal laws controlling its sale. By around 1890, researchers estimate that about 1 in every 200 Americans was already addicted to opiates. Many of them did not even know they were addicted. The government only stepped in 1914 with the Harrison Narcotics Act, the first federal regulation on these substances. That happened more than 2 decades after peak use. It may sound far removed, but between 2017 and 2023, the opioid crisis in the United States killed more than 80,000 people a year. History repeats itself in ways we would rather not recognize. Fact 20. In 1875, putting a piano inside a saloon was not a simple decision. The instrument cost between $300 and $600, which worked out to about 10 to 20 months of a typical cowboy's wages. It was by far the most expensive item in the whole place. But the owner who made that investment knew exactly what he was doing. A saloon with a piano attracted a different kind of crowd, people with more money in their pockets, who were willing to spend more on drinks and gambling. The bigger problem was not even buying it, but getting the piano there. Transportation cost an extra $50 to $200, depending on the distance, and in some cases the instrument was hauled by mules across hundreds of miles of rough terrain. Adjusted for inflation, those $400 would be about $12,000 today. For comparison, a top-of-the-line Steinway now costs more than $200,000. Fact 21. A premium leather saddle, the cowboy's car. In the Old West, a cowboy might sell his horse before he sold his saddle. Sounds crazy, but it made sense. A well-made saddle could last for decades. A horse, not always. Around 1880, a professional saddle cost between $25 and $75. To give you an idea, a cowboy's monthly pay was around $30, so a man was putting months of work into that piece of gear. It was handed down from father to son, patched up until it could not take any more, and only sold when things got truly desperate. Today, those $50 would be worth about $1,500 in current money. A quality saddle today costs between $2,000 and $8,000. In 1880, more than 30,000 craftsmen in the United States were making saddles and harnesses. When the automobile arrived, that industry practically disappeared. Today, only a few master saddle makers are left, mostly in Texas and Wyoming. Fact 22. The Telegraph, the internet of the Old West. Long before carrying a cell phone in your pocket, sending news over long distances was expensive. Out in the remote parts of the West, Every word in a telegram cost anywhere from 25 cents to $1. A short 10-word message could cost as much as $10. That was a full day's pay for hard work, sometimes more. That's why nobody sent telegrams for no reason. It was for serious business, a death in the family, a deal closed, an outlaw spotted. In today's money, those $5.78 would be worth about $150. Think about that next time you complain about your phone bill. And there's more. Western Union, founded in 1851, was the first American company to be worth $1 billion. The way it charged by the amount of information sent is basically the same model phone companies use today, with data plans. Fact 23. A decent hotel. Reality versus Hollywood. Let me tell you something Hollywood never showed. In Tombstone or Deadwood around 1880, a decent hotel room ran from 50 cents to $1.50 a night. Sounds cheap, right? But hold on. Decent back then meant sharing a bed with two strangers, no bathroom, and gunshots and piano noise all night long. A room all to yourself cost $2 to $4, the equivalent of about $120 today. And there's more. Most of those hotels used the so-called hotbed system. The same bed was rented out to 3 different guys in 8-hour shifts. The mattress literally never got cold. You were lying down in the previous guy's sweat. Think about that next time you complain about a Motel 6 on the road. Fact 24. A coffin. The business that never stopped growing. Now pay attention to this. In Tombstone, Arizona, back in the 1880s, there was one guy who never ran out of work, the undertaker. A simple pine coffin cost around $5 to $15. The fancier ones, with lining and handles, went up to $75. In today's money, that's close to $300 a piece, and a funeral here now costs between $7,000 and $12,000. It was such serious business that the violent death rate hit 18 per 1,000 people a year, a number similar to the most dangerous cities on the planet today. While miners were breaking their backs with a pickaxe and gunfighters were betting their luck in the saloon, the funeral home owner slept just fine. The real tough one was the man measuring the dead with a tape measure. He was the one ending the month in the black, whether bullets were flying or not. Fact 25. The cost of starting a new life in the West. What the flyers didn't tell you. Railroad posters were shouting, "Plenty of land for dirt cheap," and thousands of families fell for it. But the real bill was something else. A train ticket to the West cost between $40 and $80. A plow, an axe, and basic tools added another $150 to $300. Seeds for the first planting ran from $20 to $50. By the time it was all added up, a person needed $300 to $500 in their pocket just to get started. Almost a full year's wages for the average worker back then. In today's money, that's around $12,000 just to begin. And there's more. Most people got there without enough money to make it through the first winter. Between 40 and 60% of homesteaders gave up and left before completing the 5 years the law required. They came back broke, beaten, but with a story to tell.